13 days in October 1962 brought humanity closer to extinction than any moment in history. Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba could reach Washington in minutes, forcing President Kennedy to choose between nuclear war and national humiliation. The youngest elected president faced the ultimate test of democratic leadership: risk everything to remove the missiles, or accept Soviet nuclear dominance 90 miles from Florida. Kennedy's advisors split between military action and diplomatic surrender. Generals demanded immediate airstrikes. Diplomats urged negotiated retreat. The president stood alone with the most terrible decision ever faced by a democratic leader, knowing that either choice might destroy the civilization he was sworn to protect. The crisis revealed democracy's greatest weakness and strength simultaneously. Democratic debate slowed decision-making when hours mattered. But democratic wisdom prevented the nuclear war that authoritarian pride would have triggered. 13 days proved that sometimes democracy's survival depends on one leader's ability to resist both military advice and public pressure. October 14, 1962. A U-2 spy plane photographed Soviet medium-range ballistic missiles under construction in Cuba. These weapons could deliver nuclear warheads to Washington, New York, and every major American city within minutes of launch. Kennedy learned of this threat on October 16th, beginning 13 days that would determine whether democracy survived the 20th century. The missiles represented more than military threat. They were Soviet checkmate in the Cold War chess game. If operational, they would neutralize America's nuclear advantage and force democratic capitulation to communist expansion worldwide. Kennedy faced stark choices: accept Soviet nuclear dominance or risk nuclear holocaust to remove the threat. Military leaders demanded immediate action. Air Force General Curtis LeMay insisted that surgical strikes could destroy the missiles before they became operational. The Joint Chiefs unanimously recommended invasion within 48 hours. Democratic generals who had won World War II believed military solutions could resolve nuclear crises. They were catastrophically wrong. Kennedy created ExComm, the Executive Committee of the National Security Council, to manage the crisis through democratic consultation. For 13 days, cabinet members, military advisors, and diplomatic experts debated options, while Soviet technicians worked around the clock to make missiles operational. This democratic process nearly proved fatal. Each ExComm meeting consumed hours when minutes mattered. Military briefings, diplomatic consultations, and congressional notifications slowed responses when speed could have prevented nuclear deployment. Authoritarian leaders like Khrushchev could order immediate action. Democratic presidents required consensus building that consumed precious time. The absurd irony: democracy's greatest strength, collaborative decision-making, became its greatest vulnerability in nuclear crisis. Kennedy needed congressional support for military action, but couldn't reveal the crisis without triggering public panic. He required Allied consultation, but couldn't trust NATO secrets to remain classified. Meanwhile, Soviet missiles approached operational status with each passing hour. U-2 flights revealed launch sites nearing completion. Intelligence estimates gave Kennedy days, perhaps hours, before Soviet nuclear weapons could incinerate American cities. The democratic dilemma: military action risked nuclear war, but diplomatic delay guaranteed Soviet nuclear deployment. Either choice might destroy American democracy, through nuclear destruction or strategic surrender. Kennedy's private communications with Khrushchev revealed both leaders' desperation to avoid nuclear war while maintaining superpower credibility. Each demanded the other's retreat, while offering face-saving compromises that preserved mutual survival. Khrushchev's secret proposal proved both leaders understood the stakes. Soviet missiles would withdraw from Cuba if American missiles withdrew from Turkey. This trade offered mutual de-escalation, but Kennedy couldn't accept publicly without appearing weak to domestic critics and NATO allies. The solution required democratic deception. Kennedy agreed secretly to remove Turkish missiles while publicly rejecting any Cuba-Turkey trade. This arrangement allowed both leaders to claim victory while preventing nuclear war. But it violated democratic transparency principles that Kennedy had sworn to uphold. Democracy survived the missile crisis through undemocratic secrecy. Kennedy's private deal with Khrushchev remained classified for decades, preventing American voters from learning how close their president had come to nuclear surrender. Saturday, October 27th, brought the crisis to breaking point. A Soviet surface-to-air missile shot down Major Rudolph Anderson's U-2 over Cuba. Military advisors demanded immediate retaliation. The momentum toward nuclear war became almost unstoppable. Kennedy's restraint at this moment saved human civilization. Against military advice, the president chose diplomatic pressure over military action, giving Khrushchev time to accept American terms without losing face to hardliners in Moscow. Sunday morning, October 28th. Khrushchev announced Soviet missile withdrawal from Cuba. The nuclear crisis ended through diplomatic victory that neither side could publicly celebrate. Kennedy had forced Soviet retreat while secretly agreeing to remove Turkish missiles. Both leaders preserved their nations while compromising their principles. Democratic critics accused Kennedy of weakness for not invading Cuba. Military leaders resented presidential rejection of their unanimous recommendations. Allied governments complained about exclusion from decisions affecting their security. Kennedy absorbed this criticism to preserve the victory that nobody could acknowledge, the paradox of democratic survival. Kennedy's greatest presidential decision was the one he couldn't explain to the people who elected him. Democratic transparency would have revealed the Cuba-Turkey trade, destroying the appearance of strength that made diplomatic victory possible. The Cuban Missile Crisis established precedents that still govern nuclear diplomacy. Democratic leaders facing nuclear threats must balance transparency with secrecy, speed with consultation, strength with restraint. Today's nuclear challenges echo 1962's dilemmas. Putin threatens nuclear escalation over Ukraine. Xi considers nuclear coercion over Taiwan. Iran develops weapons that could trigger regional nuclear war. Democratic leaders must respond to these threats using Kennedy's playbook: private negotiations, public strength, secret compromises. The uncomfortable modern truth. Democracy's survival still depends on leaders' willingness to make undemocratic decisions when nuclear weapons threaten democratic civilization. Presidential secrecy, military restraint, and diplomatic deception remain necessary tools for preserving the democratic values they appear to violate. Kennedy's legacy reminds current leaders that nuclear crises cannot be resolved through democratic processes alone. When minutes separate civilization from extinction, one person must decide for everyone, making democracy's survival dependent on undemocratic authority. The Cuban Missile Crisis proved that democracy could survive nuclear confrontation, but only through undemocratic leadership. Kennedy's secret compromise with Khrushchev violated transparency principles, while preserving the civilization that made those principles possible. 13 Days in October 1962 established the template for nuclear survival: public strength, private flexibility, and presidential willingness to bear criticism for decisions that cannot be explained. Democracy endured because one leader chose humanity's survival over personal credibility. The ultimate lesson: when nuclear weapons threaten democratic civilization, preserving democracy requires temporarily abandoning democratic methods. Kennedy's undemocratic secrecy saved the democratic world.